Good morning, everybody. Thanks for tuning into the Capitalist Cast. Joining me this morning is Representative David Rowe. Representative Rowe, could you tell us a little bit about your district and where you're from?
Absolutely. Good morning, Leo. It's fantastic to be here with you guys. So I have the privilege of representing the 85th Legislative District, which encompasses most of Union and Snyder counties. If you jump on Route 15, heading north out of the Capitol and stay on it for about an hour, you'll end up driving right through the heart of my district. So it's a fairly rural area. We've got two universities, Bucknell University and Susquehanna University. We've got a significant amount of small businesses, some manufacturing. So it's a fairly rural, diverse community that I've been privileged to represent since I came in on a special election in September of 2019, and I was just reelected to a full term this past November.
So to say that your first bit of time in office was exciting is probably a bit of an understatement.
It's definitely not the first year that I was expecting to have. It's been quite the steep learning curve. But I will say that I am grateful that I do have the opportunity to at least be here and be a voice for a lot of the people that have felt shut out during this whole state shutdown process.
Yeah, and that was one of the reasons that I really wanted to have you on, because I know that not only do you represent small businesses and your constituents, but you're a business owner yourself. What has just all of this, we went into the pandemic with, we need to shut things down for 14 days to flatten the curve. And I mean, that just turned out to be a complete, lie. We're still in it a year later doing a lot of the same stuff. So what has the experience been for you, not just as a legislator, but as a business owner too?
Yeah, and this whole 14 days to flatten the curve, that was March 16th, was the first day that Tom Wolf took his county by county shutdown and mitigation orders, as he called them, took them statewide. And that was what he said would be a tough 2-week period, which has turned into a tough 12-month period. The anniversary is coming up right here. And that's sort of, as an aside, why I think it's always very we should be very cautious about letting the government have any amount of control, because any amount of control and power that you turn over to the government will not be limited. They will take as much of it as they can. So as we look at what has happened over the past 12 months, we have seen the decline of small businesses. We've seen skyrocketing unemployment. Under Tom Wolf, over 3 million Pennsylvanians had to apply for unemployment since the shutdown started. One of the highest unemployment rates in the nation at the moment. And all throughout all of this, the unemployment compensation system has been just an unmitigated disaster, where countless Pennsylvanians are still waiting for their first paycheck after being out of work for almost a year. So it's definitely been very difficult, and it's been most difficult on small businesses. So I'm a small business owner. My brother and I are partner owners in an athletic facility up in Union County. And we were faced with these shutdown orders. We were faced with the decision that every small business in Pennsylvania was faced with. Do we shut down and risk potentially never reopening? Because as any business owner will tell you, just because you're closed doesn't mean your costs don't stop. You still have rent to pay and insurance. You still have payroll. You have all these other things. These restaurant industries that are struggling, they have to go through a lot of consumables, a lot of perishables. So their expenses don't stop just because the government shuts them down. But we look at the comparison to these big box stores, Walmart and Lowe's and Home Depot. And let me just say, as an aside, I have nothing against corporations. They're still employing people. They create jobs. They create wealth. That's a great thing. But what we don't have in Pennsylvania is we don't have a truly competitive free market economy where small businesses and large corporations can compete on the level playing field. What we have instead is we have a governor who has driven billions in market share towards these large corporations while he's been shutting down the mom and pop shops that are just trying to get by. And Tom Wolf himself even said a couple of months ago when he was questioned about it, he said, oh, well, we sent a letter to these big box stores, but they didn't pay attention to us. They ignored us. And the difference is that they can afford to have multi-million-dollar legal firms on retainer because they know that they can combat these shutdown orders, and that Tom Wolf knows that he'll probably lose. So he's not going to war with the big box stores. He's letting them run roughshod over all small businesses, and he really has just sided with Wall Street at the expense of Main Street. And I think that the toll on Pennsylvania's small business industries are really only going to continue to go up, as we are going to see that these PPP monies from the federal level are sort of helping float small businesses through currently. But a lot of them, bankruptcy is on the horizon for them. It's really just a matter of time.
Yeah, and it's interesting what evidently Tom Wolfe doesn't understand, despite having run a business, is the fact that in finance they call it, and in business management they call it fixed costs. So just because the governor says you guys can't open your door, as you mentioned, you still have rent that you need to pay. You still have all of the utilities that go along with it. You'll have whatever other costs that are just fixed that you're stuck with month to month, regardless of whether or not you're even turning the lights on. So as far as, owning a gym and having that, type of business, you guys, if I'm not mistaken, so could you walk us through the timeline of what that looked like for gyms and, the fitness industry in general?
So early on, when the whole era of COVID first started, we also, out of an abundance of caution, because nobody quite knew what was going to happen, we did follow the initial round of shutdowns, where we followed the first 2 weeks, which turned into 2 months, which then has went on from there. And since then, we lost a few of our staff members, some of them because they didn't feel comfortable coming in, some of them because they had to seek alternate employment. And so they have found new jobs. And now that we've reopened, we are at once again, lacking in our staff that we need to recruit once again. And so we finally reopened, but we had already taken a hit at that point. Our landlord at the time was not interested in negotiating any sort of, rent forgiveness, rent reduction, which, no fault on him. He has bills to pay too. But that's just sort of a testament to exactly how it does trickle down and affect more than one person. And one of the largest things that I heard early on in the shutdowns was that we needed to have rent forgiveness and we needed to suspend rents and all these other things. And typically it was the tactic of those sort of pro-rent moratorium advocates to vilify landlords as if they were all some sort of, evil corporate fat cat hanging out in a smoke-filled room at the top of a skyscraper, when in reality, most of the people in my district that are landlords are duplex owners that maybe live in one side and rent out the other side. A lot of them are senior citizens, they're retirees, they're widows who use the rent to simply pay their bills. So as we had people losing their jobs, unable to pay their rent, it was those people that were struggling the most. And so those individuals that were saying, well, if you just forgive all of the rent, well, there is no such thing as forgiven rent or free rent. Somebody somewhere is bearing the cost and picking up the bill. So that happened to us as well, where we were closed for the better part of 2 months. Once we were able to reopen, we were reopening with limited staff, limited capacity. Obviously, our membership numbers had dropped. And we've been rebuilding ever since then. But it definitely has taken a long-term toll that I think is going to be really difficult, especially for a lot of industries, particularly restaurant industries, where those sort of fixed costs tend to be much higher. For us, a lot of our costs were insurance and rent related. But for many of my friends who are small business owners that own restaurants, for them to be able to bounce back is going to be much more difficult.
Yeah. And then just as things were starting to, kind of, I don't want to even say get back to normal, but as businesses were starting to be able to just re-hit their stride again, right, before Christmas, right at the, what would be essentially a busier time of year, the governor shut businesses down a second time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's unfortunate. His timing sort of demonstrates either, and I hope it is incompetence, and it is not malice that he is directing towards these small businesses, but the timing of his shutdowns really couldn't be worse. His communication obviously is lacking. We in the General Assembly find out about his plans when he puts out a press release. So our constituents find out the same time we do, and it makes it very difficult for us to answer questions, to resolve issues, when we're just finding out what's going on the same time they are. But the timing of these shutdowns, the governor gives no heads up. gives no advanced warning. Many of these restaurants just restocked, whether they're food stores or they're alcohol stores, for a busy holiday season, hoping that they can finally put those numbers in the black. It really is those days, those busy holiday weeks, that keeps many of these businesses solvent for the rest of the year. But with no heads up and no warning and really no data to justify his decision-making process, he shut them down yet again, creating immense hardships for these families right during the holiday season. I had constituents calling me, telling me that they were taking back Christmas presents. They were turning to Walmart because they had to choose between Christmas for their kids or paying their rent. And that's the sort of decision that people really shouldn't have to be making, to be able to make decisions on how to run their business. That is, they know best, right? Our small business owners know best how to run their business safely, how to take care of their employees' families. And the thing that makes the least sense of all is that all of the governor's previous mitigation orders were still in place. So for him to tighten those restrictions even further by either shutting down or limiting alcohol sales the Wednesday night before Thanksgiving, those sorts of things, he's saying either that his mitigation efforts currently are not working, or he's saying we need to do more, and that's obviously something that is embarrassing for him to admit. And if that's not the case, then he's just intentionally doing this to harm small businesses. So I would hate to blame it on malice when hopefully I could blame it on incompetence, but either way, the businesses are struggling.
Yeah, and we were looking at some data. The Commonwealth Partners one of their folks had done a right to know request as it relates to the data behind some of these shutdown orders, and something like 1.4% of cases could actually be traced back to restaurants. So, I mean, the number of cases that they were able to trace back to restaurants, and I don't even think that there was any data, related to tracing it back to, businesses like gyms and that kind of stuff. It's beyond the pale, because you really are shutting down people's lives. And it doesn't just impact, the financial outlays. If you take a step back and look at what are the mental health consequences of, not only for small business owners, but for their employees, if you don't know when your next paycheck is going to come in, or whether or not, this business you've spent the last 10 years building is going to be able to survive, that takes a toll in other ways. And we've seen that play out in the data as it relates to increased overdoses, increased mental health, like emergency calls. It's just created an enormous strain on the system that really could have been avoided.
Yeah, the data that we've been seeking since the beginning of this really doesn't bear out, the data we've been able to gather, that is, doesn't bear out any of the decisions that Tom Wolf has made.
Wait, are you suggesting they haven't been cooperative in giving you data?
They have not been cooperative. The fact that we have to file right to know requests to find out these information, the fact that the governor shut down the right to know offices and required an act of the General Assembly to make that happen. And let's remember that Tom Wolf didn't even sign that bill into law. He just petulantly allowed it to lapse into law. Because he didn't want to be seen as vetoing something that was passed unanimously by the House, because I think that obviously the General Assembly unanimously thinks that transparency is an important thing. So why doesn't Governor Wolf, and what is he having to hide? So, very early on, we were the only state in the union to shut down the construction industry. And Tom Wolf had no justification for doing that. He had no data to back up that decision. But we had people calling us who were homeless, essentially, because they had timed the construction of their home with the sale of their previous home. We had people who had construction sites that were eroding, that were becoming not just safety hazards, but also an environmental issue. We had people who were living out of their vans because they already sold their home, but they couldn't move into their new home because the real estate industry had been shut down. Just crazy things that really made no sense when you looked at the data or the lack thereof. So, you also touched on another really important point, and that is the mental health aspect. The numbers do not lie. The statistical data for mental health issues is there, and it is very clear that we are seeing massive spikes in not just tragic things such as domestic violence and child abuse, but we're also seeing spikes in suicides. We're seeing spikes in substance abuse and overdoses. At a time when Pennsylvania is already facing an opioid crisis, having to see that issue exacerbated by the governor's decision making really just shows, again, I hope it's incompetence on his part and not a sort of intentionality to make these sort of decisions that have really had a devastating impact on Pennsylvania's lives.
Yeah, and I mean, it really it doesn't stop there. When you take a look at small businesses, business owners such as yourself, and individuals really have the ability to make decisions kind of based on their own risk tolerance. You as a business owner were able to look at it, in the first 14 days and say, yeah, you know what, I don't exactly know what's going on. This might not be a bad idea to just kind of tone things down. And I think that that's a reasonable approach. I'm sure that your customers, your clients, took kind of a similar approach. But then as the data comes in, people are able to make rational decisions. I mean, someone may have a higher risk tolerance than I do, but as individuals, we have a better gauge of what we're willing to do. And the data, when you look at these places that have harsh lockdowns versus no lockdowns, like Florida, Florida's actually outperforming Pennsylvania on a whole variety of metrics. So we've really seen that play out. And unfortunately, the places that had the more lax or the more individual, decision making friendly decisions or decision making policies have really fared better than, particularly Pennsylvania.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because I do believe that I have complete faith in our small business owners that they know what's best for themselves and their businesses. So to have a bureaucrat in Harrisburg deciding a one-size-fits-all plan for every restaurant and every gym and every small retailer in Pennsylvania really just doesn't make sense. I remember some of the guidelines that first came out. My brother and I looked at them and we just kind of chuckled because we thought we already do all of these things. When it comes to sanitation and cleanliness and all these other things, we already sanitize our equipment. We already sanitize everything that they're saying to do, we already do. We know how to take care of our facility and protect our athletes. And so, going to the gym in and of itself, driving to the gym, you take a risk getting in the car, right? You take a risk when you go out to eat. Maybe you get food poisoning. It's a statistical outlier, but those are the sorts of decisions that individuals make every single day where unless you lock yourself in your basement and hide, and even then you're not safe because who knows what sort of health issues might spring up from living that sort of, that lifestyle where you're just hiding from the world. So these are the sorts of things where the individual should be free to make those decisions for themselves. If you choose to go out to eat, if you choose to assume the risk of leaving your house and getting in your car and driving to a restaurant, those are all decisions that you should be entitled to make. The same thing should go for going to work or going to the gym or opening your business or closing your business. There are some business owners in our community who just decided to just outright close for a few months, and they had the financial stability to do that, and I supported their decision to do that as well. I support the individual's right to make their own personal decisions for their own personal safety. Because at the end of the day, it should be the individual's right where if you don't feel safe going somewhere, then you shouldn't go. And the same thing can be said for anything that we look at, whether it's extreme sports. We can watch people who are adept at skiing or dirt biking, or we watch them do crazy things on YouTube and we think, wow, that's so dangerous, but it's still their decision. We don't tell them they can't do it. So just to extrapolate that back, for the government to tell someone you cannot go out to eat with your family, you cannot go exercise at the gym, makes absolutely no sense when you bring it back to the choice of the individual. And it really is almost a slippery slope forward, where now we have started talking about it's the government's job to protect us, not just from a foreign invasion force, but also from ourselves. So if at this point it's not safe to go to a restaurant or it's not safe to go to the gym, it's not safe to operate your business, what's next? Is it not be safe for us to drive on certain days? Will it not be safe for us to have certain foods? Will it not be safe for us, to own firearms? And that's the sort of slippery slope that we go down when people start to believe it is the government's job to keep them safe rather than it being their own individual decision. We look at chronic health issues that have been plaguing Americans. We look at the highly carbohydrate-centric diet that Americans consume, with high-end fructose corn syrups, high-end refined sugars. Those sorts of things have really caused an obesity and a diabetes epidemic, a type 2 diabetes epidemic in the United States that cost the healthcare system trillions of dollars over the years. So if the government wants to keep us safe, the government should be banning sodas and sugars and anything that's a refined carbohydrate, anything that's not a meat or a vegetable, right? But that's not what we live for, because it's the individual's decision to say, well, I'll have dessert today. And once you start gaining a little weight, you decide, well, maybe I need to start working out and eat a little bit less. But that's the individual's decision. And that should be extended to everything, whether it's the free market, whether it's owning a small business, whether it's what you eat, how you exercise. So for the government to step in and tell us what we can and can't do for our safety is a very slippery slope.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that it's important to recognize when the government says something, when the government just dictates something, when the governor says you need to shut your business down, that's not a suggestion. Government really has a monopoly on the use of force in order to make these things happen. So if you as a business owner said, well, I disagree with the governor's choice to close down businesses, you very quickly can have armed men at your business telling you, no, you need to shut down. And it's not just a matter of you making a decision to open your business because you think you can tolerate the risk and your customers can tolerate the risk. It's a matter of, making a decision about what level of coercion are you willing to deal with in order to not only to earn a living, but in order to make sure that you can pay your bills.
Mm-hmm. And that's why, looking at how President Trump had been handling the crisis by issuing guidance through, the Cyber and Infrastructure Security Agency, those CISA guidelines that we tried to adopt here in Pennsylvania with Senate Bill 613, that you'll recall we did pass and the governor did ultimately veto. But that would have provided the sort of objective guidelines that would have enabled small business owners and the individuals to make decisions based on those guidelines without it being made a mandate. And that's what I believe is how, as you referenced earlier, many of these states that are actually doing better than Pennsylvania now, that is how they handled it from the outset. Those governors knew, such as Governor DeSantis in Florida, knew that the individual knows better how to take care of themselves, their business, their employees, and their customers than does a bureaucrat in some state capital that has never owned a small business or had a stake in a small business or worked in a small business their entire life. So we have these bureaucrats that have maybe are very good at their individual jobs, but they have never had any experience in the entrepreneurial world. They've never started a business or run one. They've never signed the front side of a check. They've only ever signed the back side of a check. And those are the sorts of people that are making decisions on how business owners and job creators like me and my brother, they're telling us how to run our businesses. And just as you said, it's something that if you are declining to operate in the way that the government is suggesting that you do, suddenly you have people on your door shutting you down. And the real scary part is how we are starting to see, and we saw this on the state level with Governor Wolf's Department of Health encouraging people to use their snitch portal to report small businesses or people that they think were maybe violating the Department of Health's orders. And I would get, my office would get crazy phone calls from people telling me that they saw their neighbor leave at 7:30 in the morning and they think that their neighbor might be going to work, but they don't think their neighbor's essential. So should they call the police on them? And these are the sorts of, crazy things that we've seen happen historically that have led to very tragic, heartbreaking, and disturbing incidents in other countries. But that's the sort of behavior that we really need to nip in the bud, because once you start having individuals reporting to the government that they are not following the groupthink and the standard and the protocols for safety that the government has arbitrarily decided, you are heading down a very dark path.
Yeah. And one of the places where the government really does have that duty to protect, I would say, is as it relates to facilities that they oversee, like for health reasons. And you had mentioned the state of Florida and some of these other places. One of the places where Florida and some of these other southern states really outperformed Pennsylvania was in what their approach to senior citizens in nursing homes. I know that you are on the Adult Services Committee in the House, and what a lot of people don't realize is that 50%, a little over 50% of Pennsylvania's fatalities were actually nursing home patients. Can you talk a little bit about, how what happened with that? I know that there's hearings and everything going on, but if you could kind of give some background as to how we ended up with that. 50% of Pennsylvania's deaths are from nursing home patients.
Sure. So what I have said, almost a year ago now, and you can look back at my posts on Facebook, my press releases. The thing that I have said repeatedly is that with this virus, we know very clearly what demographics are most susceptible, and that is people who are immunocompromised and senior citizens. And what I've said from the very early on is what we need to be able to do is concentrate our efforts and focus state resources on providing protections for those specific individuals. And we could do that without needing to cripple our supply chain, bankrupt small businesses, drive up suicide rates, all those sorts of that have been more of Tom Wolf's focus. Under the purview of the Emergency Powers Act, the governor could have utilized vacant facilities for sort of COVID convalescence centers. Right outside my district in the city of Sunbury, there's a hospital that was just vacated within the past year that would have been ready to go. The governor could have moved that into a senior citizen convalescence center. Out in Beaver County, there's another very large medical facility that really is turnkey, ready to go. And I'm sure there are other facilities across the state that could have been used as sort of quarantine centers for COVID patients. But instead of doing that, Governor Wolf was focused on making sure you had French fries with your beer and making sure that you shut down by the appropriate time. And he focused state resources on issues that really had no impact on protecting the people that really needed it. And of course, it all comes down to that devastating policy that we all are all too familiar with now, where the governor and the Department of Health required nursing homes to readmit COVID positive patients. Now, the governor has tried to claim that that is based on federal guidance, but that is not true. The federal guidance left it as a may, not a shall, meaning that the nursing homes could be left to their own decisions on whether or not they had the ability to quarantine COVID positive patients or whether they didn't and they shouldn't. But unfortunately, the governor required that. And we see other states where that was not mandated. The governor here in Pennsylvania stated that it was necessary to make sure that the hospitals were not overwhelmed, but we never reached that point anyway. So he was preemptively taking decisions, making a decision that we knew would have a devastating impact to avoid something that might potentially happen, which never ended up materializing. And instead, he just threw the most vulnerable people in harm's way and ended up having a catastrophic fatality rate. And now we've seen the Secretary of Health was recently asked by Senator Susan Collins up from Maine in at her hearing at the United States Senate. And even during that hearing, Senator Collins made some inquiries about the nursing home data, and Secretary Levine didn't have the right answers. Secretary Levine's data was wrong. The Department of Health's data was inaccurate. So are we looking at in Pennsylvania, the same thing what happened up in the state of New York with Governor Cuomo? It would make sense given that Governor Cuomo, Governor Wolf, Whitmer, Newsom, and Murphy were all sort of part of this team that implemented very similar policies, if not the exact same policies in all of their states. So I would not be entirely surprised, and I'm hoping that what Leader Benninghoff announced the other week, that there would be an investigation by the House Oversight Committee. I hope that is carried out to the fullest extent. I hope that is a very thorough investigation because I do believe that we will find that the governor has misled the people of Pennsylvania on his nursing home policies, on what has happened, simply because we can really draw parallels to other states like New York because the exact same policy was implemented there. Just this past week, there was a hearing with the Aging and Older Adult Services Committee, and the current acting Secretary of Health would not even attend the hearing. Not only would the Secretary not even attend the hearing, but the Secretary would not even accept a phone call from Chairman Day, the current chairman of the Aging and Older Adult Services Committee. So again, as we talked about earlier, it comes down to transparency, where if the Department of Health and Governor Wolf have faith that their policies were impactful and they did not have a detrimental effect, they should be able to defend those policies in the public forum. But the fact that they are hiding from them, the fact that they are misleading the public by claiming they are a federal mandate, federal guideline is not correct. And the fact that the secretary will not even attend a hearing to explain the policy, I think is very concerning. And I'm hoping, as I said before, that the Oversight Committee is carried out thoroughly.
Yeah, it's definitely something that we're going to be keeping an eye on. And I know that, the various committees in the House are also looking to keep an eye on, I guess, and this is probably outside of, obviously, you're not in the Attorney General's office, but I think it's really unfortunate that at the outset of his investigation, our current Attorney General, Josh Shapiro, said that he wasn't going to look at the governor's policy as it relates to malfeasance at nursing homes. He was only going to look at the private sector actors' conduct. I mean, it's just appalling when you consider the Attorney General's job is to investigate things like this, and he's from the outset of the investigation stating, I'm not going to look at all at the governor's conduct or the Department of Health's conduct. I'm only going to look at these nursing homes who had to follow the orders of the governor and see what they did wrong.
It makes absolutely no sense, because these small businesses, these privately owned nursing homes, were simply following the orders of the governor and the Department of Health. So if the policies implemented had a detrimental impact, then those policies need to be part of the investigation. And we look at what happened in New York. The Attorney General, who hasn't been investigating Governor Cuomo, is herself a Democrat. In Michigan, where the Attorney General is investigating Governor Whitmer, that is a Republican. So this is a bipartisan effort. It is not exclusive to one part or the other to want justice for the families of these senior citizens who tragically and needlessly lost their lives. And so for Attorney General Shapiro to clearly really abdicate his role and his job for whatever reason, whether they're personal or political, I really think is really a dereliction of duty on his part, where the policy very clearly had a detrimental effect, and bipartisan teams of attorney generals in other states are investigating those policies. And for Attorney General Shapiro to not do that really does a disservice and denies justice to those people who deserve it.
Absolutely. Well, hey, we're at about a half hour. I know you have hearings and everything committee votes and everything this morning. So I really appreciate you taking the time to join us. I know that the folks who tuned in live and the people who will be watching this as a recorded broadcast will also appreciate it. Thanks again for coming on today, and we will see you next week, everybody.
Thank you, Leo. Have a good one.
You too.